Up next, Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kukucha, in your opening statement, you said with respect to the improper COVID payments, of which 38.5 million tax dollars improperly went out the door according to the Auditor General, not to mention 63 conflicts of interest involving board members in which millions were funneled into companies in which board members had interests in, you said that you relied in good faith on legal advice. Is the legal advice that you, as a member of the board, received from one Mr. Ed Vandenberg?
Sorry, I was muted by the host. Yes, it was, Honourable Member.
Okay. The same Ed Vandenberg who sat on the two-person SDTC member council, correct?
You're correct, Honourable Member.
Yeah. So you're a lawyer, Mr. Kukucha, through you, Mr. Chair. Do you not see a conflict there that Mr. Vandenberg sat on the member council while at the same time providing legal advice to the board and being remunerated for such service?
There were discussions at the board about the structure of the member council and the challenges with it, and my understanding was management was trying to work with government to try and find a way forward with that. But yes,
Mr. Vandenberg had been providing legal advice to the board on other matters as well. It wasn't just in respect of the improper and unlawful COVID relief payments, right?
I keep getting muted. I apologize, Honourable Member. Yes, he was providing advice, and I do.
Thank you for that.
Mr. Cooper, just 1 second. So I'm sorry. I think what's happening is that when a witness is done speaking, we return to a member. You're being muted. So if you could just unmute yourself to both witnesses, avant que vous parlez, s'il vous plaît. If you could unmute yourself, that's what's happening. So. It doesn't always happen. I think it's because of just the, well, anyway, for today, that's what has to be done. So, Mr. Cooper, you have 3 minutes, 15 seconds. The floor is yours again.
Mr. Kukucha, have you read the SDTC's enabling legislation, the Canada Foundation for Sustainable Development Technology Act? I presume you have.
You do need to, as I said, you do need to unmute yourself, sir. Back to you. There you go. Yeah, over to you.
Honourable Member, I have not read the entire Act. I have read the policies related to SDTC.
As a board member, surely you were familiar with the enabling legislation. I mean, I find it incredible if you weren't. I mean, that's a big problem in and of itself.
Sorry, I keep getting muted. I apologize, Honourable Member. I have a general overview of the legislation, but I have not read it in detail.
It sure isn't actually a very big piece of legislation. It would take all of 15 minutes to go through, and if you had bothered to read the Act, you would have known that at Section 16 sub 2 it states, quote, "No member shall profit or gain any income or acquire any property from the foundation or its activities." That's precisely what was happening in the case of Mr. Vandenberg. So not only was he in a conflict of interest in providing legal advice, he was breaking the law. Isn't that right?
Based on your statement, Honourable Member, I will take it at face value. I would only comment that once we got into the special committee process, I actually did flag for the board and management the issue of Mr. Vandenberg and ask he be removed, but he was not removed at that time.
So, again, conflicts of interest, money improperly going out the door, and reliance supposedly in good faith on counsel who was in a blatant conflict of interest and who was in blatant contravention of the SDTC Act. I mean, it's just unbelievable that you can come here with a straight face and defend the practices of SDTC and its board in the face of that. And speaking, Mr. Kukucha, of law breaking at SDTC, which you were complicit in, Mr. Vandenberg was part of a two-member council, a council that under the Act is required to have 15 members and requires 5 members to achieve quorum, and yet this two-person council appointed 5 directors to the SDTC board, all unlawful appointments. How do you explain that?
Honorable member, when I joined the board, this system was in place and operational for many, many years. I did flag, and the board did have discussions.
In fact, the Auditor General, in her damning report, which you won't even concede or accept, said that the board that you sat on was complicit in this illegal activity. The board supported the law breaking. Isn't it part of a culture of corruption, self-dealing, and law-breaking? Isn't that what was going on? Because I would say to you, Mr. Kikucha, it raises serious questions about why the board would have been complicit in having an unlawful 2-member council. It was all about making sure Liberal insiders and cronies of board members were appointed as directors so that they could get a piece of the action to pad their pockets in a corrupt racket that makes the sponsorship scandal look small by comparison. That's what happened.
You have the floor, sir, if you'd like a response.
Yeah, honorable member, I can only speak to my own conduct. I did not have, there was no corruption that I directly saw or was aware of or participated in. Errors were made. We acknowledge those. I did accept the results of the Auditor General's report, and candidly, I did flag for the board issues with both the Members' Council and Mr. Vanderberg, but they were not acted upon. As a new member to the board, all I could do was my best to raise issues, see if they were dealt with, and try to move the organization forward in a positive way. But I will concede errors were made for sure.
Thank you very much. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kikucha, you said that as a member of the board, you didn't even bother to read the enabling legislation, which would have taken all of 15 minutes. Did you take the time to read the contribution agreements with ISID? My time is...
Sorry, that was a direct question for Mr. Yes, Mr. Kikucha, did you catch that question, or is your he might be frozen?
Just stop that.
Yeah, we'll just suspend here for a second.
Is he pulling in a net for Sharon?
Yeah, here I'll suspend the meeting until we can see if we can get the witness back. Can you hear me all right? Just give me a thumbs up.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Perfect. Puis Mr. Ouimet, ça va aussi avec vous?
Mr. Ouimet, it's fine for you also? Yes, very well. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kikucha, you said you hadn't bothered to read the SDTC Act, which, if you had, you would have realized that the legal advice you were receiving and the board was receiving was in contravention of the Act. Have you bothered to read the contribution agreements with ISID?
And honorable member, as I was started in my last answer, the contribution agreements were negotiated between management and the companies. So they were all individual to projects.
You
so we did
sat
not
on
have
the
access
board.
to
You
those.
sat on the board, and you were voting yes or no in respect of funneling money out the door. And had you bothered to read the contribution agreements, you would have learned that when you voted to approve millions of dollars in COVID funding, putting aside the conflicts of interest, that it was also in contravention of the contribution agreements with ISID. But you didn't bother to read those agreements, did you?
Honorable member, the COVID approvals that were made, the second COVID approvals, I was only on the board for the second COVID approvals, came to us with a a blanket set of funds with no list of companies to give management discretion. And when I asked management whether or not this was in, because I specifically asked the question, and other board members did as well, whether or not this was in contravention or whether or not it was approved by government. Management confirmed it was approved by government, and there was no
mention of the
dissent
contribution agreements. And you said, or at least Mr. Ouimet said and Ms. Verschaeren said in their testimony, that the board approved those funds because SDTC's portfolio companies were struggling during COVID. But you know, sir, that isn't true.
Honorable member, I do know a lot of companies were struggling during COVID. So we took it on face value that management had canvassed all the companies and had
face value, sir.
Information.
Sir, through you, Mr. Chair, it's my time, reclaiming my time.
Order, gentlemen. As I said, we're trying to safeguard the interpreters here as well as maintain decorum. Mr. Cooper, you have the floor, please.
The whistleblower testified that at the time of the second tranche of the improper and unlawful so-called COVID relief payments, of which you were then on the board, SDTC had completed a full survey of the total portfolio of SDTC companies and found that every single company on average had over 14 months of runway, proving that the companies that received the money didn't need the money. You would have seen that analysis, wouldn't you have?
Honorable member, we did receive the analysis. I can't speak to the specific facts you mentioned, but there were concerns with supply chain. There were concerns with a number of issues, and even companies that I was involved with that had no involvement with SDTC were deeply concerned about those. So
14 months of runway. 14 months of runway, and the money went out the door. Yet, sir, had nothing to do with COVID relief and everything to do with funneling money into the companies in which board members had interest. And that's what really was going on. Mr. Ouimet, when you last appeared before this committee in December, you stated that at SDTC, quote, the conflict of interest management procedures are rigorously followed. Do you stand by that?
Absolument.
Absolutely. The procedures have been respected, but the documentation did not reflect it at certain points, and it was recognized by the Auditor General, and it's been noted.
Mr. Ouimet, you keep claiming that the minutes were the problem, not that there were conflicts of interest, not that money improperly went out the door, but there were inaccuracies in the minutes. But Ms. Lawrence stated, and I'm referring to paragraph 69 of the Verschaeren report, in which Ms. Verschaeren was found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner, that with respect to the minutes, they were carefully reviewed and amended internally where necessary and should be considered accurate. Is Ms. Lawrence wrong? Is that what you're saying?
Je ne peux parler que pour moi-même.
I can only speak for myself.
I didn't hear
Yeah,
the answer.
he said he can only speak for himself. You have a small question time remaining, Mr. Cooper.
Well, I'll ask Mr. Ouimet if you would apologize to Canadians for the conduct of the board. 186 conflicts of interest, $38.5 million in COVID relief payments that improperly went out the door, millions of which went into companies of board members. Would you apologize and admit that that should not have happened?
Non, je reconnais les...
No. I recognize the findings of the Auditor General, and the statements of the Honourable Member are false.
That turns us now to Ms. Bradford. You have the floor.
You should
for 5
read the
minutes,
Auditor
please.
General's report, and he should read
Order,
the Ethics Commissioner's report.
Mr. Cooper. We've moved on to Ms. Bradford. You have the floor.